All right, looks like we have a good group. So we're going to go ahead and get started, knowing that probably a few people will join us maybe a little bit later. But let's go ahead and get started. So we try to stay on time as much as possible because we got a lot to cover today. So first of all, let me thank everybody for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. I know this time of year is especially hard, so much appreciated you taking the time to join us. We've got some timely information that we're going to be sharing with you today. And really talking about kind of the year-end process that most everybody on this call has to face, and obviously looks forward to every year. And we're going to be covering it on both solutions that we represent. So we're going to be spending some time on year-end close process for Dynamics GP. And then once we're done with that, we're going to jump into the year-end close process for Dynamics 365 Business Central. On the screen in front of you are some of the things that we're going to be covering. So on the GP side, and it's pretty similar on both of them. Steps to close out the financial year, both in GP and in Business Central. Tips and best practices for keeping your ledgers in line and in sync. So we're going to be covering that on both of the solutions as well. Some more tips and best practices of some restrictions that you may want to put in place. So posting by dates, restricting posting by date and by user. And then there's some updates that both solutions are rolling out based on some change that the federal government made to 1099. So we'll be talking about reviewing 1099 setup and reporting and some of the type activities there that you need to contemplate. So again, a full agenda today. We're hoping that we can get through everything within the 1 hour period we have slotted. But again, with all the content that we have, we may run over. If we do run over and you do have to leave, don't worry about it. Again, we are going to be recording the session, and if you do happen to miss the last 5 or 10 minutes or whatever it might be, you can catch that in the video that we send out in the next day or two. All right. So with that, let me move forward. Talk about some housekeeping type activities. We've got a good crowd here today, so we have everybody muted just to keep down the background noise. As I mentioned, the session will be recorded and videos will be sent out to all attendees. I would expect we'll have that available sometime tomorrow, maybe Friday at the latest, but we'll send that email out to you with the link to the session, the recorded session for you to view or for you to share with others within your organization. If you can, during the session, if you have questions, please enter those questions in the chat window of GoToWebinar, and we will try to address those questions during the presentation itself. And then certainly at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A as well. So feel free to jump in, type in those questions in the chat window, and we will certainly try to get them to you, or get to them if I will. Correct myself there. All right, so getting started, I want to just kind of do a quick poll of the audience here. So ask a couple questions. Those that are attending today, let me know, are you closing either GP or BC? So let me know what you're closing, which solution you're focused in on. All right, and then the second question, once you have a chance to respond to that, the second question is this the first time you've performed a year-end close? So do we have any kind of rookies out there that are going through this process for the first time? And we might have some Business Central users out there that, this might be your first year-end close, where if you've been in GP for years and years and years, this might be old hat to you. So let me know about that. And then the last question is, what is your biggest concern with closing? Is there one thing or a couple things that really just kind of keep you up at night when it comes to the year-end close? All right, so I see we've got a couple people, as expected, a couple people that are closing Business Central, one GP. Let's see, we got some veterans on here when it comes to the closes. 1099s seems to be a concern area, which, yeah, it can be. All right, breaking the environment. Yeah, that's always a good one. There's nothing wrong with a good backup. So, all right, so we've got kind of a myriad of people in different technologies, first time veterans, and some concerns out there. So with that said, we'll go ahead and move into the presentation. Today we have two kind of experts in the area that are going to be presenting. Laura is going to be presenting first. Laura Murphy, most of you may know her. She's the CEO of ACE and longtime GP contributor, presenter at Directions, presenter at Summit on topics near and dear to our hearts when it comes to GP. So she's going to be taking some time first to go over the year-end close process in Great Plains. And then followed by Laura, Chris Zeiler will be presenting year-end close best practices on the BC side. And so we think both of them will be able to provide some strong content that'll hopefully provide some insight for you, some additional confidence, whatever the case may be. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Laura, and we're going to advance to her first slide. So Laura, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for being here. I put together a checklist. This is really not changed over the last many years, still kind of the same thing, but I wanted to make sure that, you know, I kind of touched on some of these bullet points. A lot of times people want to know, when do I have to close which modules? So there is an order to that, and I've listed that order here. And of course, Mark's going to provide not only this this video, but also the slide deck. So you can always refer back to this, but you always close inventory, then receivables, payables, fixed assets. AAAA, for anybody who doesn't know, is analytical accounting. If you are using that, that's a dimensional approach to your general ledger. And then payroll, and then finally general ledger is typically going to be your the last thing that you will close for the year. So always kind of focus on this this order, and you should have a pretty clean overall across GP year and close. We're going to focus primarily on the financial side, or the GL side today, and which most people really want to have this to be very smooth, obviously, for all of your beginning balances and so forth. So you want to post your final adjusting entries in general ledger. Now, I'm going to tell you and remind those of you that are in GP that GP allows you, even if you close without all of your audit transactions, you know, all of those final batches and things like that that belong in GP that need to be posted for that closing year. GP allows you to go back 1 year and go ahead and post those, and it will update all of your beginning balances and so forth. But to keep it as clean as possible, the best practice is to go ahead and post what you know that belongs in 2023, and before you kind of start this process, it will be a cleaner concept for you. You want to print an account list to verify the posting type of each account. The posting type is either balance sheet or P&L, and you want to make sure that if you added any new accounts during the year, that they are set properly. GP doesn't really care what the number is in association to what that type is, and you could be posting all year long on a new account that is a balance sheet account, but it needs to be a P&L account. So what happens if you close the year and that is still set as a balance sheet? The balance is going to move forward into 2024 when it really should be rolled into retained earnings, and vice versa, right? We want to make sure that if it's supposed to be a balance sheet account, it's not a P&L, it's not set as a P&L account. So this is a very important step, probably one of the more important ones that you'll have when you are getting ready to close your general ledger, is to make sure all of those accounts are right. These are easy smart lists to take a look at, but very important to do, fix, tweak, adjust, and then you can successfully not have to. It's fixable. I'm going to tell you right now, it's fixable if this happens and you miss something, but it's not an easy process, and so we want to make sure that everything is as fine-tuned as possible before we move into the actual close. Close the last period of the fiscal year. You just want to go into your fiscal calendar and check those boxes. You want to verify the settings in your general ledger setup window. I'm actually going to show you that window here in a minute. Make a backup. You can do that. We always kind of do SQL backup. So you can have your IT, or if we're helping you, we'll be happy to do that for you to make sure that backup happens. And we name them specifically to associate that this is pre-close and this is post-close and so forth, so that if we have to restore, we're in a good place to be able to do that. You want to print a final detailed trial balance report. This will help you validate and make sure that if something does go awry, you've got some physical documentation. You want to print your year-end financial statements. Again, this is about validation after the year-end close is completed. You want to make sure that you have a new fiscal year, because if you've got balance sheet accounts that needs to roll into a new fiscal calendar for the new year, that year isn't set up, where will that data go? In fact, it won't go anywhere, and the close will fail. You'll get an error message. So make sure 2024 has already been set up. Then you'll want to go through and close the fiscal year. I'm sorry, before it was the last period of the fiscal year, but then you want to also close the fiscal year. Close the fiscal periods for all the series. Again, those are those check marks in the for all the periods and all the series in your fiscal calendar. If you're tracking budgets or have budgets, you want to adjust your budget figures and then print the financial statements associated to budgets. You can do this. This isn't a deal breaker. This is an optional step. You can always add your budgets or adjust your budgets at any time. And then you'll want to make a final backup before you start this. So really quick, Mark, if you'll print it over to me, that would be great. So what I'm showing you here is our demo environment for GP. This is the general ledger setup window. There's a couple of things that I want you to make sure are marked. And it's in this maintained history area here. First off, you want to make sure that you're maintaining history on your accounts and your transactions. Go ahead and mark budgets if you are doing, if you are using budgets in GP. The other thing is under allowed, you want to make sure that you're able to post to history. This is going to help you in the 2024 year be able to post back to 2023 any adjustments that you need to make. Don't be afraid to do this. This GP does very well with this concept, and it allows you to really be able to close the 2023 year in January of 2024 without having any issues associated to beginning balances and being able to run your January, February, March, whenever financial statements, because your beginning balances will be there and you're allowed to adjust those. So, so these maintain history and under allow posting to history all needs to be marked. Now, you may, as a controller or an account manager, decide that you're going to mark posting to history is allowed just for this process, and that is okay, because that is a point of conversation. Somebody says, oh my gosh, I have this AP transaction that should have been entered back in December. Can I go ahead and do it? And you want to be able to have that conversation about whether you need to turn posting to history on for that. If it's always on, then they're going to be able to do that, and that's fine. But you want to make sure that on some level you can control that. And this is just a checkbox: turn it on, turn it off if you want to, when the close is finished. Once you've kind of gone through all of these prerequisites, then you're going to want to do the actual year-end close. The actual year-end close is really very simple. You will see that the year that needs to be closed will be listed right here. This is my demo environment, which has many forward years, obviously. You want to make sure the retained earning account is set here. If somehow something happened with this account during the process, during the year, you want to make sure that that's set and it's set where you want it to be. You have the ability to remove unused segment numbers and to maintain inactive accounts. It's not going to get rid of accounts that have balances, but you have some control here. And once, this is a very small window, there's not much to it. Once you have that good solid backup and make sure that this is what you want it to be, then you can just click close here and it will start to run. Everybody should be out of the system for this. It does take a while to process this, depending on how much activity you have in your GL throughout the year. So allow yourself plenty of time. This is kind of a good over the weekend kind of thing to, or overnight kind of thing to do. And with everybody out of the system, it needs to be planned and scheduled accordingly. The other thing that, excuse me, that you will notice here is reverse the historical year. Remember when I was talking about the balance sheet and P&L counts could be flipped for an account that should have been one or the other. There are a couple of things that we can do. There's some steps that we can go through to fix that through a series of journal entries and things like that. But one of the easiest things, since they've added the reverse historical year, it actually allows us to kind of undo a year-end close that happened where you found problems after the fact. So it should, and this process works pretty, quite well as well. So you can undo it. Give yourself a little bit of extra time to kind of catch up with some things that need to be fixed, and then reclose the year. So it will reset this year to 2023 or 2024, and whatever is going on. Typically, you'll see 2023 in here because that's the year we're about to close. When you close and then want to reopen, it will reset to the next one that needs to, the next year that it recognizes as still a current year and needs to close. So all of this is a very, very easy, window to navigate, but at the same time, you want to give yourself plenty of time, make sure you have solid backup, and really go through those prerequisites first. Moving into the kind of the next topic, tips and best practices. In your account maintenance, just a regular, GL card, there's a little box here that says allow account entry. One of the things that you want to make sure that you are consistently doing is reconciling your subledgers to the general ledger at the end of each month. And when you have a subledger that has a trial balance, AR, AP, cash, fixed assets, those things that you really want to reconcile and keep in check so that the numbers that you're seeing in the AR module on your age trial balance match what the general ledger says, or you definitely know why. The easiest thing that can happen to get them out of sync is if somebody posts a general ledger transaction directly to one of the GL accounts that has a subledger age trial balance associated. So this little box right here is by default, it is checked, right? So that means that anybody can just go in and do a journal entry to a cash account, or journal entry to the AR account, journal entry to the AP account. And you can control this just by unchecking that box that says you can't just, you've got to run your transactions through through an AP transaction in order to get to the general ledger. You can't just arbitrarily go into this account and just randomly do a journal entry. So this is where you can kind of control that as an account manager or controller. And again, if somebody says, this is off and I need to fix it with a journal entry, another point of conversation. Do I need to uncheck this just to fix it? And or do I need to check it just to fix it and then uncheck it again so that generally nobody can get this, can just arbitrarily do that. So keep in mind that this is a little control that you have to keep those ledgers in sync with the general ledger, the subledgers in sync with the general ledger. So a little tip on how to do that. Make sure when you're running your agings, you're always running it by the GL date and not by the document date. You want to make sure that everything, is syncing up on that. And then if it's out of balance, it makes it so much easier to see what is potentially causing you to be out of balance. You can also use something called the reconcile to GL. It creates a comparison between the subledger and the GL. It's a large Excel report that runs automatically. Some people have really like it and use it consistently. Some people have a little trouble with it on the first go round, but once you kind of get into a rhythm with it, it's usually quite easy to work with. The next thing I want to talk about is moving into the 1099s. We definitely wanted to show 1099 information and kind of how you manage that. So I'm going to start first with the fact that you do need to be validating the entries that have taken place during the year for 1099 vendors and make sure that the totals that you expect it to be represent what you would want the 1099 to show. 1099s are generated based on payment, right? So it's not when the invoice was received, it's when the invoice was paid. And that's what's being tabulated throughout the year, is all of those payments that are 1099 related. Of course, we know that in a AP transaction, a transaction could be split. Some of that invoice could be 1099able, some of it maybe isn't. And the person entering that information has the ability to make that determination. By default, if I enter a $1,000 invoice and it's a 1099 vendor, then I'm going to see $1,000 in the 1099 box. But if I need to split it, I have the ability to do that. And sometimes it can be fat-fingered accidentally. Sometimes it shows zero. It just depends on kind of how the entry is being pushed through. Sometimes it happens because of an integration, didn't populate that value. So there's a lot of reasons that it can go askew. So you definitely want to reconcile that before you send your 1099s off at the end of the year. One of the easiest things that you can do to start this process is to just run a smart list. There is a smart list that's already out there called 1099 vendors, and with a little asterisk, that means that it is a default smart list that was created and with the system. What I've done is I've taken that and I've added the tax ID number and the 1099 amount year to date to that to this report and saved it, so that I can see straight away who has been tagged as a 1099 type. Is there a tax number on file? And you can see I have a lot missing here. And so I'm able to just kind of click on this, go over to options, and immediately see that the tax ID number is missing. And so I want to make sure that I have, I'm able to update that right away so that the 1099s come out right. The other thing that you know, I want to see is these are my starting values. This is what 1099 amounts year to date is showing. Now, if I paid Bergeron Communications during this year and there's nothing in this box, and I know for certain that I've paid them, then I'm suspicious of why this is zero. What is happening here? That tells me that the transactions that went through for them did not get captured as 1099able, and I need to look at this. Maybe that's an accurate statement. Maybe it should be zero. Maybe whatever it was that was being paid doesn't have anything to do with 1099s, but it certainly gives me the start of where I need to start looking and fixing and adjusting. So I want to make sure that that is, that I look at this report and kind of see what I'm dealing with at first. From there, I want to go to, like I just showed you, I can go to a card and I can make sure that they are by going into their card and then going into options. I can enter their tax ID. I may need to make sure that the right box is checked and so forth based on all of this information. So I'm able to update it right here from this report and go forward from there. Now, if I find some stuff that needs to be fixed, right, I have a few options to do this. Number one, I can go into the 1099 details, and the 1099 details will tell me, and I can be very granular by tax type. let's see, I pay rent, or I do non-employee compensation. I have interest or miscellaneous that I want to keep track of, and I want to, I just want to update the year for these areas. I can do this all right here, and that will impact my 1099s that are printed out. I can just plug a number right. I guess I should do here. I can update the actual value. So I could say that Beaumont needs to have $500 in June because I know I paid them in June and that $500 was 1099able. So I can actually update that. And as it's doing that, it's accumulating the amount of yearly 1099 value that is associated to this particular vendor. And from there, I can continue to go through each month and do this, in this sort of ad hoc way. The other thing that I can do is, my next string, I can do this in an edit 1099 transaction information. This literally, instead of doing it just by in total by month, this literally brings up every single transaction I did for that period of time. And I can adjust right here what that number should be for every period that I'm dealing with. I can change the box number. I can change whether it should be miscellaneous 1099, or maybe it should not be 1099able at all. It needs to come back out. So every single transaction is associated here, and it keeps track of all of that and associates that to the payments that are ultimately made. And I can see, and I can drill back on these transactions through the drill back function here. So it will literally take, if I were to make this change from $2,067, it would make this change to 0 for me. And that would then in turn update the 1099 value that would be on their 1099 form. So a lot of ways to do that. Obviously, the other thing that's missing from this is the people that were never set up as 1099s and should have been. Then I can go ahead and update their card, change them, and I can mass change every single one of those transactions. If they are not set up as a 1099 vendor, then they will not show up in the other window that I just showed you. So you want to make sure that you've set them correctly at the card level so that you have visibility in the 1099 transaction edit and the 1099 edit window. One is in cards, where you can do it on the summary level, and then one is under transactions, which is done at a more detailed level. This year, the 1099s for the year-end update, fundamentally the 1099s have not changed, but Microsoft did change in their update and add all the lines, so, and the boxes, so you don't have to buy forms. And so as a result, getting that 1099 or getting the year-end update will help you with this process if you are generating 1099s. The lines are all there, and you can print them right out of GP as soon as you've done all of your validation steps that we've gone through, and all of those lines will be there. So make sure that you kind of take a look at that. If you've already bought forms, don't worry about it, but it does have that information for you, and you can go from there. The other thing that I want to mention is that one of the biggest changes is that the 1099s this year are required to be electronically filed if you have more than 10 or 10 or more. Now, the caveat to this is that that is 10 or more between payroll W-2s and 1099s. So if you have 9 employees and 1 1099, individually, you wouldn't think that you would have to file electronically, but they total 10, which means that you have to file everything both electronically. Now, GP does do if you're using payroll, does do W-2s electronically, but it does not yet do 1099s electronically. If you need to do that, you realize that you fall into that category and you've got to file electronically, you need to get with your account manager, and they'll guide you in some of the options that are available to you and get you set up as quick as possible with that outsourced electronic filing system in order to meet that requirement that the IRS has set for us at this point. So that's it. I've got everything covered on my list. Mark, are we doing questions at the end?
Yeah, we'll do questions. I didn't see any questions come in on GP. We do have a question for BC that we're going to hold until Chris gets through his content.
Okay.
So I think we're in good shape. So we can just, if you want to turn it over to Chris.
Chris, I shifted.
All right, so you should see Dynamics Business Central. Do you see that on the screen there, Mark?
I do.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
I see it.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Hope everyone's doing well. Thank you, Laura, appreciate it. So we're looking at Business Central. I have a very basic demo company that we're going to be working out of today. And I'm kind of going to go through the steps of the things you should be looking for as part of your year-end close in Business Central. A lot of the concepts are very similar to what Laura just covered on the Dynamics GP side. So if you are a customer that did migrate from Dynamics GP, these concepts should not be foreign. So the first place that I'm going to start is looking at our accounting periods inside Business Central. And if I just go to my search box and type in accounting periods, this is all of my fiscal periods that exist inside Business Central. As you can see, this is a very limited company to keep things simple here. But we have the year of 2022 that we're going to be closing today. You can see the closed flag on that year is open, meaning that it can be changed, it can be modified, and so forth. So I always recommend that you keep at least one, if not two, future years open inside Business Central. So this is the window that you would go to create, not only close the fiscal year, but also create new years as well, just like the fiscal period setup window inside Dynamics GP. So you can see I have 2022, and then I have 2023 and 2024 open here as well. And that just helps if you're using the deferral module inside Business Central and you're deferring expenses or revenue out into the future, then it's landing in the appropriate fiscal periods for the next year if they are posting out that far. So good best practice is having 2 years set up inside the accounting periods. So just like in Dynamics GP, before we get into the year-end close process, some things that you should be looking for. All of your outstanding transactions for the fiscal year should be posted. You should have already done a reconciliation of all of the subledgers. And by subledgers, I mean accounts receivable, accounts payable. All of those modules have their own sort of checklist for closing out each month. You should be going through that every single month. However, we'll cover a couple of things that you should look for at the end of the year. So I'm going to move away from accounting periods here, and I'm going to go to my chart of accounts list. And in my chart of accounts list, I've got my full chart here with my account numbers. And really the first thing that I want to look for, just like in the Dynamics GP world, is making sure that any new accounts are properly classified as balance sheet and income statement, or income statement, I should say. Because when you do create you close the income statement, it is going to look at this income balance type here to determine if an entry does need to be generated for that account. Business Central generates the closing entry against income statement accounts. It's the exact opposite of Dynamics GP. Dynamics GP pushes balance sheet forward. Business Central utilizes the methodology of closing out income statements to retained earnings. So very important that you're looking at that. And obviously you can filter this list if you need to by balance sheet. So if I need to filter here, filter to this value, I'm just going to see my balance sheet accounts. I can make the change and look at just my income statement accounts. and just make sure that all my numbers jive and I don't have a 1000 series account in my income statement. Very important. Once we have that taken care of, really the next step is running a trial balance, just like in Dynamics GP. Since all of your subledgers are closed, you can go ahead and print a physical trial balance. I don't like paper, so I very rarely print one out, but if you do like paper, you can go to Reports and Trial Balance directly from here, and you can go ahead and pull in your changes and balance, and I can come down here to my date filter and put in my dates for the year, 1/1 to 12/31, and I can go ahead and preview that report. And that'll show me my year-end balances for all of my accounts. Now, I don't like paper, so I like utilizing my chart of accounts list here to view. So I've set up a saved, we'll call it a smart list because we have some Dynamics GP folks on here. I've set up a trial balance saved view here that shows me all of my accounts that have a balance. I should say all of my posting accounts that have a balance as of 12/31/2022. So you can see in my filter criteria over here, I'm looking at posting type accounts that are not equal to 0, and then go through the end of the year 2022. So I can see I have some accounts here that I want to make sure that I reconcile to my subledgers. I have 2 inventory asset accounts right here, raw materials and goods for sale, and then I also have an accounts payable account here that has a balance. So every subledger has a prescribed report that you should run to balance to the GL control accounts every single period, and of course at the end of the year. In accounts payable, we'll start with inventory. In inventory, there's a very specific report called Inventory to GL Reconcile. So the Inventory to GL Reconcile is really your go-to report for any sort of subledger to general ledger reconciliation. You're going to put in your as of date, and if you want to filter by location, let's say you're utilizing different control accounts by location, which is like a site ID, I could filter this by location. But when I preview that report, you'll notice it's going to show me all of my items and all of these fields here. Oop, that's too much. There we go. It shows me all the activity and then the inventory value that should be posted to the GL for all of these items. So if I scroll down here to the end of my list, I should have a total inventory value from the subledger to the general ledger of 31.9. If I'm utilizing, received and not invoiced, I also have all of those values that should interact with the GL up here as well. So if I have expected cost on shipments that haven't been invoiced, or I've got receipts that haven't been invoiced from purchase orders, I'm going to have those amounts here too, and I can use this same report to validate against my GL. So just to reiterate, we have 31.9 here. If I go back and I look at my trial balance, I've got 20 plus 11, 31.9. I am totally balanced between my finished good inventory and my raw materials inventory. From an accounts payable and accounts receivable standpoint, we're going to use the aged accounts payable or aged accounts receivable report in both of these scenarios. Both of these have an as of date, so I'm going to age this as of the end of the year, which is 12/31/2022. I've got other filters in here as well. Remember, the posting groups determine which control account is going to hold the liability or the asset for the customer, meaning the receivable or the payable. So if I'm using multiple posting groups across my vendors to go to different payables accounts, then I'm going to want to filter this so I can see it by control account. If not, I can just go ahead and preview my report, and I'm going to get my aging, and this is very simple demo data. Love it. It's never this clean. But I've got a $2,000 liability in my accounts payable subledger, and that should match my $2,000 sitting in accounts payable domestic. So your age trial balance for receivables and payables, and then your inventory to GL reconcile from inventory. I'm not going to repeat the process on the receivable side. I think you guys get it. So once the subledger's been closed out and everything has been reconciled, we can now go back to our accounting periods and we can close that year. So I'm going to go to my accounting periods window. Remember, 2022 is not closed. And I'm going to go ahead and choose any period in that year and go ahead and click on close year. And it's going to give me a dialog just prompting me to verify that I'm closing the year beginning January to December of 2022. I'll go ahead and say yes. And now you can see we've got closed checkboxes on that entire year and the date locked checkbox as well. So I cannot change the fiscal periods for fiscal year 2022 going forward. But just like in Dynamics GP, I can create entries if I have audit adjustments that come through in March and I need to make those audit adjustments back to 2022, I can do that. Now, Business Central, it's a two-step process. Closing the year locks it and locks in the dates. But my next step now is I need to generate my, my closing entry. So I'm going to close my income statement. And that is a task that you can search for here. When I click on close income statement, what that's going to do is look at my most recently closed fiscal year in accounting periods and give me the last date. And then it's going to ask me for which batch do we want to generate the entry in. So I'm going to say I want it in my general template, and I'm going to go ahead and put it in. I'll just put it in my, well, let's create a year-end close batch here. That way it's nice and clean. So I'm going to go ahead and create that year-end entry in my year-end close batch. It's going to look at my number series to determine my next document number. And then the first time I do this, it's going to ask me for what is my retained earnings account. I can go ahead and put that in. And remember, what this entry is doing is it's looking for income statement accounts as of 12/31 that hold a balance. And it's going to close out that balance and move it to retained earnings. So this post to retained earnings account, I can have one entry go to retained earnings, which is the net of my entire P&L section, or I can enter details, which would show me one entry per account. I like less. It's called the general ledger for a reason, so I'm going to choose balance. I do not want multiple entries to my retained earnings. I just want one. If I'm using business units, I could activate that here. If I'm using dimensions inside my P&L, I'm going to want to choose which dimensions I want to enter a specific closing entry for. So if I want to make sure I'm clearing out the certain department, if I'm using the department ledger, or I'm using a customer group or something of that nature, I'm going to choose which dimensions I want to close out as part of this entry as well. Once I'm done with that, I'm just going to verify, and I'm going to go ahead and click OK. This is typically very quick. It will tell me that my journal lines have successfully been created. If you recall, I'm going to go, it was in general journals and it was in my year-end close batch. So I can now go and review that entry. Oh, and it took me right into my year-end close batch. You can see very simply, I only had two P&L accounts that needed to be closed out. My cost of materials, which is my cost of goods sold, and then I had a media services here, and then I have my net result going to 30110. And you'll notice these posting dates over here have a C as a prefix. This specifically defines them as closing entries that roll into the next year. That way we're closing out these two P&L accounts for the future year. So if all is good, I can go ahead and post this entry, and now I've successfully closed out 2022. And that is all there is to it. If I do have those audit adjustments that get posted in March of the next year, remember, I can go ahead and post those to 2022. And then I would just go through that close income statement process again to generate those entries that would make those entries go into retained earnings. It's not going to happen automatically. So once you post those year-end adjustments, you'll want to go ahead back into your close income statement again. and close out that income statement to generate those changes and roll them into the next year. All right, so those are the basics for closing the financial year. Let's go ahead and move on into 1099s and processing 1099 forms. So to do that, one key difference between Dynamics GP and Business Central is that Business Central, as long as you're in the cloud, a cloud deployment, it is receiving constant updates, which includes any 1099 changes or IRS changes. So the home base for 1099s is our 1099 form boxes page. And this is going to show you all of the boxes that have been defined inside Business Central and can be associated with not only a vendor, but a vendor transaction. So my recommendation is after you close out the prior year and before you start the next year, come into this window and click on Update Form Boxes. And what this Update Form Boxes will do is reach out to the IRS and make sure that all of the boxes are accounted for. And there haven't been significant changes since I believe the COVID year, 2020, to our box numbers. However, it is a good practice to update form boxes at the beginning of the fiscal year to make sure that you're picking up any possible changes. Now, I'm sure 95% of the people on this call that utilize Business Central for 1099s are really concerned about one code, and that is this code right here, NEC01. So you can see the minimum reportable quantity on that is $600 being paid in the fiscal year in order to generate a 1099. So you'll see all of those minimum requirements as well on this window. So when you go to create your 1099s, the first thing that I like to do is go into reports up here at the top, and we can run a vendor 1099 information report. And that's going to show me what 1099 balances have been paid throughout the year and what are those anticipated box values going to be if I created my NEC01 report right now. So I had a problem with my demo data for 2022, so we're going to jump ahead to 2023 here and process our 1099s for 2023. So I'm just going to switch my dates around here to 1/1/2023 to 12/31/2023. And I'm going to run this report for all vendors. I could certainly filter down if I wanted to. And I will go ahead and preview those results. And you can see I've got 2 vendors that are eligible. First up, consultants, NEC01 for $14,950, and then Apex Designers for $750 under the same box number. And then it gives me a summary down below of which form type I'm going to utilize to print it, how many vendors, and what the amounts are. This is very important if you're feeding the forms into printers. This will help you know how many forms you estimated, how many forms you need, and what forms should you be putting in the printer. Now let's say that we wanted to take a closer look at the vendor level before we print these forms. Well, in order to do that, we would go and look at the vendor card. So I can go to vendors, and I'll go ahead and pull up Apex Designers right here, and I'll open up Apex Designers. And there's a couple of things that I can verify on this account. So under the Payments Fast tab down here at the bottom, this is where you specify what the 1099 code is for this vendor, as well as what kind of entity are they? Are they a natural person or legal entity, as well as their federal ID number. So that's all under the Payment Fast tab on the vendor card. You can make those modifications there. Also, make sure that your vendors have addresses, because this is where it's pulling the address for the forms themselves. And if I wanted to look at a specific 1099 detail report for this vendor, I can, or if I wanted to look at what the summary was by box number for this vendor, I can go up to Related and History, and I can look up the 1099 statistics that are being tracked for this vendor right now in the current year. So I can see that they have one 1099 code right now that that has hit the threshold. It's non-employee compensation for $750. Obviously, if they were eligible for multiple box numbers and multiple forms, it would show those down here as well. Now, if there was maybe an invoice that was miscalculated or it was not 1099 liable, well, then I can go to my single point of truth for all of my vendor transactions, and that is called the vendor ledger entries. And when I look at those vendor ledger entries, I'm going to see all transactions on this vendor card. And every single invoice transaction, if I scroll over here to the right, I'm going to have a IRS 1099 code that was tagged to that transaction. So if there happened to be a transaction that did not get coded as 1099, I can make that modification here to the originating transaction, and I can even modify the 1099 amount on that invoice specifically if I need to. I don't need to do adjustments. I can make those changes directly to the source documents here. If you remember from training, these are some of the only fields that I can modify from vendor ledger entries. Okay, so once I am done with reviewing all of my vendors, making any modifications, I know I still have 2 vendors that need the form printed for them. I'm going to go ahead back to what I started out with, which was my 1099 home base, which is my 1099 form boxes page. Once I'm on here, I'm going to go up to reports, and here are my different actual form reports. So if I'm ready to load my printer with my NEC forms, I can go ahead and run my vendor 1099 NEC report. I can choose my calendar year, and I can go ahead and print those to the printer, and this form will be completely formatted for the forms that are being led into the printer. So here's my First Step Consultants with the amount, with the address, everything on it, and we're good to go. I can obviously reprint this if I need to. Also, if you need to file electronically and create the magnetic media file that will be uploaded to the IRS, we can also handle that with the vendor 1099 magnetic media. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this. I'm going to put in my information. You'll be assigned a transmitter control code from the IRS or from the governing agency. You want to put that in up at the top. You want to put in all of your information, and you can generate that file directly from the 1099 data inside Business Central. So that is how to review your vendor 1099 information, review the transactions, how they were calculated, make modifications, print the forms, and then generate the magnetic media file that's uploaded. Lastly, for those of you that need a 1096 form, there is a feature inside Business Central to create a 1096 form. Depending on how long you've been on Business Central, this may be a feature that you need to enable, and I'll cover that in just a moment. But if you do need to generate a 1096 form, you can go ahead and go to the 1096 forms page. Open that up. It will show you a list of forms that have been previously generated. I'm going to go ahead and create new forms. I'm going to choose my dates, 1/1/2023 to 12/31/2023, and I'll click OK. It's going to look at my data, and it's going to go ahead and create one for me. And there is a number series that you assign to these forms. So if you are submitting multiple 1096 forms for different boxes, you'll get one for each box. You can see here's the NEC code. But here's one 2023-004. When I open that up, it's going to show me all of the forms and the individual vendors that are included. So you can see there are my 2 vendors that have non-employee compensation, $750 and $14,950. This is in an open status. I can go ahead and release the status of this if I'm ready to print it on my physical form. And then I can go ahead and click print and print this to the form itself and put in the information that I need. All right, that covers 1099s, excuse me, as well as the 1096. At this point, I want to cover a couple of best practices. I know we've only got a few minutes here. Laura covered a couple of these as well. But there is one key difference between Dynamics GP and Business Central. Laura showed closing periods to ensure that users or anybody in the system cannot post to those periods. Business Central handles that a little bit different. And there's two ways that you can do it. On the General Ledger setup window, I can create a global posting from and posting to that is allowed in the system. So this would apply to everybody in the system. So let's say I wanted to restrict posting to my new year of 1/1/2024. So I could go ahead and put in allow posting from 1/1/2024 to 1/31/2024. And what that would do is that would say that nobody can post to anything outside of this range inside the system. Now, if I do have some users that are doing audit adjustments or reconciling prior periods, I can use the user setup window, and I can override this restriction on a user by user basis. So I know Will is somebody in my company that I need to allow a greater range of posting dates for any of their transactions. So I'm going to go to user setup here, and I'm going to specify Will here. He's still working in 2022 and he's making some audit adjustments. So I can allow specific posting dates from Will specifically for his user in this window. And if I had additional users here, I could add them as well with their dates. So it gives me the same kind of flexibility, only Business Central kind of takes the optimistic approach on what periods can you post to, as opposed to what periods are closed. You get to the same result, it's just a little bit different. One more thing that I want to cover on the chart of accounts side, just like in Dynamics GP and really any ERP system, control accounts are king. They are your bridge between the general ledger and the subledger. So when you're setting up chart of accounts, and let's say we look at our accounts payable account, this accounts payable account right here, 22-100. Nobody should be posting entries directly to 22-100. They should all be coming from the accounts payable subledger. That's how you keep your subledger and general ledger in balance. So we want to make sure that direct posting to any control accounts are turned off. And that's this, this Boolean value, this slider right here. If I had this turned on, then people could post directly to the 22-100 account. So best practice is making sure that those accounts, those control accounts are direct posting turned off. And lastly, from to determine how you find out what these accounts are, it's all about your entity posting groups inside Business Central. So if I look at my vendor posting group, remember, vendor posting groups are going to determine which control account is used for the payables. Likewise, on the customer posting group side, that's the account that is the control account for all vendors that are assigned to this posting group. So this is how you determine what are my control accounts. All right, I think we're 1 minute over. That covered all the material I wanted to cover for year end and 1099s. If there's any questions, I can take those, Mark.
Yeah, Chris, we have one question. This is obviously from one of our clients that's on Dynamics 365 Business Central. The question is, one issue I have discovered with our 1099s this year is ACH payments and the credit card transaction summaries being recorded via journal entry outside the vendor ledger. So none of that gets included in the calculated 1099 totals because there's no association to the vendor. I'm assuming the only means to accommodate this is a whole bunch of manual research and 1099 adjustment amounts.
Yeah,
Comment on that?
unfortunately, if you're not using the vendor record and transactions that are specifically assigned to the vendor record, then those 1099 balances are not going to accrue and report at the vendor level, unfortunately. So I think at this point, it really is doing some manual research to determine who those vendors were. And you're not stuck. There is a way that we can manually put those amounts on those vendor ledgers so that you can produce your 1099s out of Business Central if that's indeed what you want to do. We could set up a, once we determine what those amounts are at the vendor level, you could import those invoices and what we would call a dummy payment on those invoices and generate those 1099 amounts vendor by vendor.
Let's see here. He's got a follow up here. This is a practice now that I'm working to correct the origination now that I'm aware of it. All right. So Dustin, if you have some follow-on questions, just reach out to us individually, and we can certainly kind of talk through what some of your options are there. It sounds like there's a couple different options that we can potentially help you with. So with that, let me just see any other questions. Not seeing anything else. So let me take back control of the screen. All right. So first of all, Chris, thank you so much. I think that was a great overview for those people that are on Business Central. And Laura, great job on the GP side as well. Certainly do appreciate that. Obviously, we've given you some food for thought. Hopefully it was helpful. Hopefully it was insightful. As Laura mentioned earlier on, if you have more specific questions, feel free to reach out to your account manager and or reach out to support, and we're happy to get involved. Because we know it's a stressful time of year. We know there's lots of deadlines associated with what you're doing. So again, if we can be of any assistance whatsoever, please let us know. Also realize that there are year-end updates out there and available for both GP and BC. If you're on BC, more than likely you have those updates. If you're on GP, those need to be applied, whether you apply them yourself or you want our assistance on that as well. Just again, let us know. But it's usually best practice to try to apply those updates. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar today. Thank everybody for their participation. If we don't have a chance to talk between now and the end of the year, wish everybody a very, very safe and happy holiday season, and look forward to working with you throughout 2024. Thanks so much. Have a great day.